of Gaza.
Okay, well, until that stops, there's not going to be any quote ceasefire anyway.
No.
So you have basically an active war.
Yep.
Going on. I'm not a military expert, but it's going to be interesting to see what Israel ultimately does here, because are they just going to surround Gaza, or are they going in with ground troops to go house to house, so to speak, it's a pretty big metropolitan area you're talking about. A lot of houses and streets. I mean, thousands, right? I mean, when you got 2 million people living somewhere, and how far deep into Gaza are they going to go? I'm talking about the Israeli forces. Should they go, or are they just going to monitor the situation, surround them, and just say, listen, any rocket fire from Gaza will be met with a tremendous response from our forces. And you don't go in and try to occupy, because you're going to get a lot of when urban warfare, you're going to get a lot of casualties.
Yes.
Of Israeli soldiers, and then if you go street by street, house by house.
Well, and the other problem is the Hamas terrorists have built a lot of tunnels, and they have gotten better at these tunnels. They're going deeper. They have full ventilation systems. There is concern that that's where the now more than 220 hostages are being held in these tunnels. What do you do with that? Sending soldiers, Israeli soldiers, into these tunnels is extremely dangerous.
If you're trying to incite a war, and you would possibly have a ton of videos and images of dead Jewish soldiers in the streets, that could excite radical Arabs in other countries to come.
Another aspect of this to consider is, why do none of these other Arab countries want the Palestinians to live in their countries? But why is that? Egypt doesn't want them. Saudi Arabia doesn't want them. The Jordanians don't want them. The Jordanians do have a lot of people who were Palestinian, who were refugees from previous wars back in the 60s and 70s. But they don't want them. You have to say, well, why? Why wouldn't you be welcoming of your own people? And I just have to think, and I've heard this said before, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, nor Jordan, they don't want to deal with Hamas either. Now, they wouldn't be warring against those governments. I'm talking about Hamas because of religious reasons, or political reasons. They would, because they wouldn't feel like that Egypt or Saudi Arabia or Jordan are doing enough to attack Israel, so therefore Hamas will cause trouble for those countries and their governments. It makes sense. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you got this tiny piece of land, Israel I'm talking about, and a sea of Arab countries and Muslim countries, and there's nowhere for these folks to go. The Palestinians who live in Gaza, nowhere for them to go. That the Arab world, with all their money, oil money, would be able to relocate these folks and therefore prevent regional war, and in this pretty much in this motivation that is Hamas's motivation to take over the land of their excuse would be exposed, is what I'm saying, because Hamas is going to tell you basically, well, not Hamas, but their sympathizers will tell you this is all about land, but we're going to hear this in a few minutes, but really it's not all about land, it's all about religion.
Yes.
Right. But for Hamas and for the Muslim, call them fundamentalists, the ones who want Sharia law like Hamas does, like ISIS did, like they have in Iran, for example, Sharia law, that is, they have in Saudi Arabia too, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what they really want. They really want Sharia.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's not necessarily just land. The reason they want to push the Jews into the sea and get them out of what is Israel now is because they hate the Jews for religious reasons. For religious reasons.
That's right.
I don't know. I don't know how you deal with people exactly like that, except by just brute force. So
that might be why they're insistent on the ground invasion.
Well, are they going to? I mean,
I think they are. I think, they've at some point they're going to say, you know what, we've given all of you countries time. You've said what you wanted to say. We're doing it.
Yeah, but they've done it on a limited basis right now.
Right.
I think they're being very careful not to just send their troops into traps or, mines or to be attacked without. They're doing as much as they can right now with internal reconnaissance, spying, and interrogation, and also aerial bombardments. We'll be back momentarily with more of today's issues on the American Family Radio Network. I'm Tim with Fred and Chris. Thank you for listening.
It's my turn.
Here is your host for My Turn, Don Wildman.
Paul writes in the book of Romans, "For by the grace given to me, I bid every one among you not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment." Let me tell you a story. A young man walked into the service station. Seeing his friend who owned the station in the rear, he yelled out, "Hey, Sam, how's business?" And from the back of the station came the reply, "As usual." Sitting down next to the phone, the young man yelled out again, "Mind if I use your phone?" "No, go ahead and help yourself," came the reply. The young man picked up the phone directory, thumbed through his pages until he came to the correct page. Placing the directory next to the phone, he dialed the number. About that time, the owner of the station walked up and sat down next to him. "How you doing with that new boat and motor, Bob?" asked the owner. "Folks been telling me they've been seeing a whole lot of old Bob Smith out at the lake hauling in the big uns." "Sure sounds like you're getting your money's worth out of it," Sam continued. Bob's party on the other end of the line had answered, and by that time he held up his hand, motioning for Sam to be quiet. As Bob started talking, Sam noticed that he was disguising his voice to keep from being recognized. Wondering what it was all about, Sam listened closely to the conversation. "Is this Woodruff's store?" asked Bob in the disguised voice. From the other end came the reply, "Yes, it is." "Could I speak to Mr. Woodruff?" Bob asked in the muffled tone. "This is Mr. Woodruff speaking," said the party on the other end. "Mr. Woodruff, I was wondering about a possible job with you. Several months ago, I saw an ad of yours in the paper where you said you needed someone to work there in your store as a salesman. I have some experience as a salesman, and I believe I could do you a top-notch job," Bob said as he continued to use the fake voice. "I'm sorry," Mr. Woodruff replied, "but the job has been filled for about 6 months now. A fellow by the name of Bob Smith contacted us, and we hired him right away." "Is that right?" Bob continued. "Sure hate that. Would have loved to have worked for you. Maybe this Bob Smith fellow isn't doing too well, and you could let him go and let me have that position," Bob asked while Sam stared at him with puzzlement. "No, I'm afraid I couldn't do that," Mr. Woodruff replied. "Bob Smith's doing us a real fine job. Fact about the business is that he's one of the best salesmen we've ever employed." "Well, I appreciate talking to you, Mr. Woodruff, and I may call you again in the future," Bob said as he hung up the phone. Now, Sam couldn't wait to ask the question. "What in the world were you doing? I thought you'd been working down at Woodruff's for about 6 months now," said Sam. "I have," said Bob. "Then why in the world did you call about a job and talk in an unnatural voice?" asked Sam. "Well, Sam," said Bob, "you might say I was just checking up on myself. You know, I guess that's something we all need to do pretty often."
This has been My Turn with Don Wildman, a production of the American Family Association.
However, as it is written, what no eye has seen, what no ear has heard, and what no human mind has conceived, the things that God has prepared for those who love him. 1 Corinthians 2:9.
American Family Radio. This is today's issues. Email your comments to comments@afr.net. Past broadcasts of today's issues are available for listening and viewing in the archive at afr.net. Now, back to more of today's issues.
Hey, welcome back, everybody, to today's issues. That's the name of this program on the American Family Radio Network. Tim, Fred, and Chris. Thank you for listening. Hey, our 2024 Spiritual Heritage Tours, the dates have been set for those tours. There's two of them. There's two tours. We go in June and September, and we go to one trip is Colonial Williamsburg, Jamestown, and Yorktown. We see those sites, those cities, and we visit the history there, the early American history. And then the other tour is our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., and also that includes George Washington's Mount Vernon estate. So if you do both those tours, it's a week, and we'll take care of you for a week. If you want to do one or the other of those tours, that's fine too. So to find out information about those are led by my wife and I, Allison, and then Stephen and Beth McDowell of the Providence Foundation. We just have a great time. So many of our supporters, listeners, who want a vacation with a purpose, so to speak. So check that out. The dates, the cost, the itinerary, everything is at spiritualheritagetours.com. spiritualheritagetours.com is the website. spiritualheritagetours.com. Tim, Fred, and Chris here. Chris, next story.
Well, building off of our discussion of the first half hour about what's going on in Israel really being a religious situation, a religious war, not a land dispute, I have some audio here, and Steve Jordan will cut this for us. It's Masab Hassan Youssef, the son of a Hamas leader, saying the war in the Middle East is a religious war, but the American media cannot say it. Clip 6.
Hamas is a religious movement, and they are raging a religious movement against Israel. This is what they are doing. The mainstream media cannot say this because they're afraid to ignite a religious war. And what I say, it already is. They want to annihilate the Jewish people because they are Jewish people, because they are Jewish state. This is why they hate Israel. They want to establish an Islamic state on the rubble of the state of Israel. Campaign, their campaign title is Tufan al-Aqsa, which means the flood of Al-Aqsa Mosque. So it is a religious situation, and we just need to expose them for what they are. They are not a national movement.
The interesting thing here is the vast majority, this has been my observation, having traveled to Israel 25 plus times. I have to count them up exactly. Been going for many years. And I know, dealt with Arabs over there, Muslims, dealt with Christians, Jews. The vast majority of people inside Israel, of all categories, basically just want to live their lives in peace and go to their jobs and do their work and come home to their families and whatever they do. But you've got these people like Hamas who stir things up all the time, and they're motivated by just hate of the Jews. And it's and so that's really what now I'm not saying that especially those in Gaza, the Arabs there in Gaza don't support Hamas by voting for them or if ideologically supportive, but I'm just saying the people I've dealt with, they wouldn't be identifying as Hamas in any way, shape, or form. Talking about Arabs, yes, who live in Israel. Mm-hmm. In fact, I mentioned this before, and maybe I can find it on the internet. There was a survey done 5 or 6 years ago of Arabs who live in Israel, in the Jewish state of Israel, and they were asked, would you rather live in Israel or would you rather live in a Muslim-dominated country? And these were mostly Muslims, and they said they'd rather live in Israel because Israel is westernized for the most part. It's a democracy, if you will. It's not a theocracy like so many of the other Muslim countries are. Most of these people, they don't want to live under Sharia law, even though they're Muslim. Yes. They don't want to live under Sharia law. So anyway, keep all that in mind. What the gentleman we just heard from is the son of an Hamas,
A Hamas leader is how he was identified.
right? And he's saying that this is for Hamas is a religious war. They hate the Jews. It isn't about land. They just hate the Jews.
Right. And that was one of the things that people mentioned at an event last night in South Carolina. Family Research Council hosted an event last night. It was called the Stand With and Pray for Israel rally, and it featured a who's who of evangelicals talking about the need for people to stand with and support Israel. Tony Perkins, for example, head of Family Research Council, talked about Genesis 12:3, which, for those not familiar with the verse, basically, those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be cursed. And Tony told the crowd there that Bible verse does not have an expiration date. God said it then, it's still valid today. So we need to have that same kind of sentiment, because that's what God expects from us. Another person that spoke was Jerry Boykin, retired Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin. He talked about how he's disgusted and embarrassed by what's happening on college campuses, where a lot of people have been gathering and doing protests and demonstration in support of the so-called Palestinians, and denouncing Israel and saying, they're oppressors and they brought this on themselves and that kind of stuff. Interestingly enough here, this situation with students on campuses has even spilled over into the presidential campaign season. I've got some audio here of candidate and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. He says he's tired of seeing this kind of stuff going on campuses, and he's ready to send students here on visas home for protesting the way that they are. Clip 4.
And I think what this terrorist attack in Israel has shown us is we're vulnerable from all the people that have come illegally, because they have come from Iran too. It's not just Mexico, Central America, Russia, China, Middle East, all that stuff. But I think what we also saw, when the blood wasn't even dry on the Israelis who had been massacred, you had people in America going out protesting in favor of Hamas. And that's very chilling. Some of these people are not U.S. citizens. They're student visas. So as president, if you're on a student visa and you're a foreigner and you're out there celebrating terrorism, I'm canceling your visa and I'm sending you home.
Any questions?
Yeah.
I think he's right, because these people are here as our guest.
Yes.
And if they're going to be out on the streets protesting our government and promoting and fomenting hatred against the Jews, he's saying, if you're doing that in a public way, you're going to be your visa would be denied. You'll be sent home, deported.
Yeah, deported. And there's a group of Republican members of Congress have sent a letter to Alejandro Mayorkas, and he's the man in charge of Homeland Security, and other officials in the State Department, and they are demanding the same thing, that these young people who are in this country on student visas, if they are caught, they need to be sent home.
Yeah, this isn't a matter of defending free speech, because these aren't American citizens.
No.
These are that argument is null and void. These are people who are here as our guest.
Yes.
So anyway, it is disturbing to see the number of people that have come out, even public people who've come out against Israel.
Yes.
Basically anti-Semites. That's what they are, anti-Jewish people.
Well, you've got the Democratic Congresswoman from Michigan, Rashida Tlaib, who, as to this day, to the best of my knowledge, has not expressed sympathy for the Jews who were massacred. She has expressed sympathy for Palestinians who have been hit by, as Israel responds to the missiles coming out of Gaza, but she has not expressed regret, something in the way of compassion for the Jewish men, women, and children who were massacred. She is a Palestinian, and she's not saying anything. But the mainstream media is saying very little about that. And the mainstream media is not saying anything about these, Hamas-loving students that they're out there.
All right, Chris, next story.
Let's include this real quick in terms of that rally I mentioned in or prayer event in South Carolina. One of the people that spoke last night was former ambassador to Israel, David Friedman. He served during the Trump administration, and he spoke in a video message aired at the Stand With and Pray for Israel rally. Here's what he had to say, clip 2.
It's a battle between good and evil. It's a battle for our Christian and Jewish souls. It's a moment in time where I think our children and our grandchildren and those we come upon later in life will ask us, where were you? What were you doing during those last 2 weeks of October in 2023? Did you help Israel? Did you support Israel? Did you do everything you could? And everybody can do different things. Not everybody needs to run and fight, but did you do what you could do to help Israel, to stand with Israel? I believe that there'll come a time when God will ask all of us that question. And those that cannot answer adequately, I believe they will not receive God's mercy.
Pretty sobering.
Yeah.
Who was that?
That was former ambassador to Israel, David Friedman.
You know, it's interesting, and it is not just Israel and Hamas. It's becoming very global, because what we learned over the weekend, that China has deployed 6 of its warships into the Middle East. Now you've got 2 carrier groups, United States carrier groups, that are off the coast of Israel. China is saying it's putting 6